In July 1943, the largest tank battle in human history erupted in a small region called Kursk, located on the border between Russia and Ukraine. In this single battle, Hitler's Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union went all in, clashing fiercely with nearly 2 million soldiers and over 6,000 tanks. This battle marked Germany's final major offensive on the Eastern Front of World War II, serving as the ultimate turning point that led to the total defeat of the Nazis. So, how exactly were Hitler's supposedly mighty armored divisions completely wiped out on the grounds of Kursk by the Soviet strategies and trench defenses? During World War II, on June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany leader Adolf Hitler launched a massive military operation named Operation Barbarossa to attack the USSR. Due to early victories like the Battle of Kiev in 1941, they managed to capture vast territories and take nearly 2 million Soviet Red Army soldiers prisoner. Yet, the Soviet Union refused to back down and continued to fight. In response to the early defeats and the brutal conditions of the campaign, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin declared this as the Patriotic War. He then called upon everyone to offer nothing to the enemy except relentless struggle. In case of a forced retreat of Red Army units, all rolling stock must be evacuated. The enemy must not be left a single engine, a single railway car, not a single pound of grain or a gallon of fuel. In the areas occupied by the enemy, guerrilla units must be formed to foment relentless struggle against the enemy. Later on, the Red Army secured its first victory in the Battle of Moscow in January 1942 and also stood resilient through the siege of Leningrad. Not a step back. We must stubbornly, without sparing our lives, defend every position, every meter of Soviet territory, cling to every shred of Soviet earth and defend it to the last drop of blood. Later on, the Red Army secured its first victory in the Battle of Moscow in January 1942 and also stood resilient through the siege of Leningrad. After that, in the Battle of Stalingrad in February 1943, they completely annihilated Hitler's famous Sixth Army. While driving the Axis invaders back to the west, the Red Army fought since a bulge or salient had formed in the Eastern Front around Kursk. The Axis forces were eager to take advantage of it. Following his defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler was desperately craving a major battlefield victory that could boost the morale of his troops. This Kursk salient was 118 miles wide and up to 75 miles deep. It was created to facilitate another offensive from the Red Army's side. To attack this area, the Axis forces split into two main groups, with Field Marshal Günther von Kluge leading the north and Field Marshal Erich von Manstein leading the south. With the intention of cutting off and encircling the Kursk salient, Hitler ordered the launch of Operation Citadel on May 4th. However, the Nazi leader later changed his mind and postponed Operation Citadel first until mid-June, and then again until July 5th. The reason for this postponement was to concentrate Axis forces in the region and send in more reinforcements, though in reality the numbers didn't reach what the battlefield commanders requested. Another reason for the delay was that some high-ranking commanders harbored doubts about the operation's chances of success. This offensive is of decisive importance. It must succeed rapidly and decisively. The victory at Kursk must serve as a beacon for the world. However, this delay proved to be decisive. Having caught wind of the threat from the two enemy army groups ahead of time, the Soviets had been heavily reinforcing their defensive positions to the north and south of Kursk since May. The two massive Soviet fronts inside the Kursk salient, with a central front in the north and the Voronezh front in the south, commanded respectively by Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky and General Nikolai Vatutin. I'm appointed commander of the Central Front. It means that Stalin has entrusted me to play the key part in the Summer Kursk campaign. Moreover, the West and Bryansk fronts were positioned north of the Bulge, while the Southwest front lay further to the south. As the fighting intensified, all these fronts were bound to lock horns with the enemy in an intense, desperate struggle. Taking full advantage of the German delay, the Red Army prepared a vast network of trench defenses around the Kursk salient. In this monumental effort, 300,000 local civilians also stepped up to help tremendously. Furthermore, minefields were systematically laid out, to the point where some areas contained up to 2,500 anti-personnel mines and 2,200 anti-tank mines within just a single mile of the front. These minefields were typically structured to funnel the attackers directly into areas where artillery forces were heavily concentrated. The total number of mines laid around the salient reached a staggering 943,000. A single one of these mines could blast apart a tank's track, and even assuming the tank wheels didn't suffer worse damage, under the best-case scenario, it would still take the crew about an hour to replace the broken section. In the Battle of Kursk, the sheer volume and depth of these minefields became a critical factor in the outcome of the war. Another major advantage for the Red Army was its artillery force. The largest Soviet artillery piece was the M1937 howitzer, featuring a 152 mm caliber and capable of firing shells over 17,000 meters. A skilled artillery crew could fire a round within just 15 seconds. Finally, the Soviet Air Force, known as the Red Air Force, had anticipated attacks from the Luftwaffe and dispersed its aircraft across various airfields, while also surrounding them with multiple layers of anti-aircraft guns. The most critical Axis ground forces in the Battle of Kursk were the 9th Army, commanded by General Walter Model in the north, and the 4th Panzer Army, commanded by General Hermann Hoth in the south. Together, they possessed 2,400 tanks, 1,800 aircraft, and around 700,000 soldiers. On the other side, the two Soviet fronts boasted up to 3,400 tanks and assault guns, 2,110 aircraft, and 1.3 million soldiers. On top of that, 6 reserve Soviet field armies were also stationed to the east of Kursk. The Axis plan was for Model and Hoth to break through the enemy defenses in a pincer movement, ultimately meeting at Kursk to encircle the Red Army. However, due to the attackers' inferior numbers in manpower and tanks, combined with the strength and depth of the defenses they had to penetrate, this plan remained a completely hopeless ambition. General Model reported to his superiors that, even if this operation achieved its goal, the casualties would be so catastrophic that it would amount to a Pyrrhic, a victory no different from defeat. General Hoth was similarly disheartened about achieving victory at Kursk, citing the lack of reserves, the excellent state of the enemy defenses, and the insufficient strength of the Axis infantry to hold the ground captured by the armored divisions. At the start of World War II, the USSR possessed a massive number of tanks, but faced numerous problems. Most of those tanks had been built in the early 1930s, and by the time they were desperately needed in 1941, they were outdated compared to Germany's superior panzer tanks. Due to weak firepower, thin armor, chronic shortages of spare parts, and poor military tactics, the Soviet tank units became easy targets for the enemy in 1941. However, starting from 1942, the arrival of the T-34 and KV tanks turned the situation around. The USSR was able to produce tanks in far greater numbers than its enemies. By 1943, the Red Army became more proficient in utilizing tanks on the battlefield. And just like their enemies, they were able to deploy them in larger, more effective combat groups. Weighing 26 tons, the T-34 tanks were superior to any tank used by the Axis forces and were capable of resisting most anti-tank guns. However, the German tanks also caught up technologically by the summer of 1943. The T-34 tanks on the Kursk battlefield featured a 76.2 mm main gun, with a top speed of 21.7 miles per hour on rough terrain. In short, the T-34 possessed a simple diesel engine, good armor, excellent firepower, and extraordinary mobility through snow and mud. But unfortunately for the Red Army, the number of T-34s was not yet sufficient, leaving them inevitably still reliant on a large number of outdated T-70 tanks. The Axis tanks, especially those of the German army, were also impressive weapons. Joining the panzer tank types, which mostly belonged to the 3 and 4 groups, were now new detachments of the powerful Tiger and Panther tanks. Weighing 56 tons, the Tiger tank was equipped with a massive 88mm gun featuring an excellent optics system, enabling it to accurately destroy Soviet tanks right from their roots, well outside the enemy's firing range. The exceptional thick armor of this Tiger was another major advantage. However, the notable drawbacks of the Tiger tank were its completely weak mobility, being too heavy when crossing temporary bridges, and its low operational availability. Although this Battle of Kursk marked the combat debut of the Panther tank, its number was limited to only 200, while the Panther was armed with a 75mm gun. At this stage, it suffered from chronic shortages of spare parts regarding mechanical and track issues, especially the engine, transmissions, batteries, and wheels. Due to these flaws, a large number of Panther tanks broke down within just the first week of the battle. Another powerful new Axis weapon was the 65-ton Ferdinand tank destroyer. Although it lacked exceptional mobility, it could utilize its 88mm gun highly effectively in defensive situations. The Ferdinand was well protected with 200mm of frontal armor, but at Kursk, many were mistakenly used as ordinary frontline offensive tanks, resulting in heavy losses due to mines. Furthermore, they were far too heavy to be towed away by a single standard half-track recovery vehicle, making it impossible to retrieve them from the battlefield. As in most World War II battles, the tanks used by both sides at the Battle of Kursk were a mixed conglomeration of battle-tested, older tanks, new tanks that commanders had placed high hopes on, and completely useless tanks that posed a danger to any soldier trapped under enemy fire that could come from the air, anti-tank infantry, heavy artillery, or other tanks. Code breakers from British military intelligence discovered the detailed plans of the scheduled Axis offensive and passed this warning along to the Red Army on July 5th. Just hours before the Axis forces were set to move, the Red Army launched a preemptive strike with a massive amount of artillery fire without specific targets, making it not very effective. Although the Axis artillery retaliated, due to a shortage of long-range guns, they could not threaten the heavy Soviet long-range artillery located far to the west of the Bulge. In the air, the Axis Air Force initially held the upper hand due to radar, but this advantage gradually turned completely upside down due to the massive number of Red Air Force aircraft thrown into the battle during July. As in other areas, the inability to replace Axis aircraft and the failure to secure enough fuel where needed proved decisive for this air war, even though Axis fighter planes inflicted casualties on Soviet aircraft at a 4-to-1 ratio. As the Axis forces advanced, General Model assigned his panzer tanks to capture the village of Olkhovatka. However, there were many requirements yet to be met before reaching the target. The defensive positions along the trenches, packed with Soviet mines and anti-tank weapons, severely slowed down the Axis progress and greatly reduced the number of operational Axis. Not only that, the chronic shortage of specialized mine-clearing vehicles among the Axis forces also became a severe problem at Kursk. Most of the mines had to be cleared by hand, and the presence of iron ore in the soil also disrupted the metal detection systems of the mine detectors. Most of the Red Army tanks under the command of General Rokossovsky were well protected inside specially constructed pits, firing at the enemy from there. Although a battle reminiscent of two artillery forces trading shots took place, This was an ineffective way to utilize tanks. In fact, most tank engagements in the Battle of Kursk took the form of a continuous series of small-scale skirmishes, making a grand spectacle like this a rare sight. Soon enough, General Model rapidly lost most of his Panther and Tiger tanks. Unable to penetrate past the Soviet second defensive line, the German general reported to Cluj on July 9 that reaching the city of Kursk was now completely impossible. By that time, the Axis forces in the north had suffered 22,200 soldiers wounded or killed, including around 4,700 killed. The Red Army on the Central Front had nearly 34,000 soldiers wounded or killed. Alcé, left with just over 500 tanks, tank destroyers and armored vehicles, General Model inevitably had to order his soldiers to prepare for the heavy Soviet counteroffensive that was bound to arrive soon. Fighting reached fiercely in the north. In the south, General Hoth began moving his panzer tanks to attack Vatutin's front. Their target was the city of Oboyan. This attack involved the elite Waffen-SS divisions, das Reich and SS Totenkopf, along with the Großdeutschland Panzergrenadier Armored Infantry Division. On the other side, Vatutin possessed a total of 625,000 soldiers, with the ability to call upon an additional reserve force of 570,000 if needed. Just like in the north, these soldiers were well positioned inside trenches and protected by extensive minefields. Not only that, Vatutin possessed an immense amount of artillery and anti-tank units, the likes of which no Axis offensive had ever encountered before in the war. The Red Army also had a massive reserve tank force that could be immediately deployed to wherever it was needed as the battle progressed. Despite obstacles, muddy terrain, and the need to construct temporary bridges, General Hoth, with the help of the right flank front of two divisions commanded by General Werner Kempf, managed to capture a considerable amount of territory across a wide front and broke through the Soviets' first defensive line. However, advancing was extremely slow, and tank casualties due to mines were significant, especially since a slight amount of damage could lead to a total write-off due to the lack of spare parts. The Axis infantry forces were also stuck, unable to move forward as they were busy clearing out the small towns and villages where the Red Army had set up defenses. Just like in the northern part of the battle, Axis pilots destroyed more enemy aircraft than they lost on their own side, but the Red Air Force could immediately replace such losses, whereas the Luftwaffe could not. By the second week of July, Axis aircraft were completely insufficient to provide adequate air cover for both Kempf's and Hoth's offensives. And then, on July 12th, the Axis offensive was halted by a massive Soviet tank force at the Battle of Prokhorovka, southeast of Oboyan. This was the largest single tank engagement in military history. Around 25 separate smaller battles broke out across a front spanning 15 miles, where about 300 Axis tanks clashed head-on with 900 Soviet tanks. In order to neutralize the fire superiority of the German tanks, our forces must attack the enemy at maximum speed to engage them in close combat. The German tank crews, especially the Tiger tanks, managed to inflict heavier casualties on the enemy than they sustained. But in the end, the Soviets' superior numbers proved decisive. What a day! I believe we knocked out 5 tanks, but I am not certain because of the dust and the quantity of tanks. It was also difficult to pick out a target. What madness! We were taught during training to destroy the enemy at maximum range, but it never occurred to us that they had this kind of distance in mind. The speed and rapid mobility of the Soviet tanks were a distinct advantage over the enemy. Ultimately, Prokhorovka was prevented from falling into Axis hands, and the Soviets' third defensive line within the Kursk salient remained intact and unbroken. The southern half of Field Marshal Manstein's Citadel pincer offensive lost up to 60% of its armored strength and suffered 33,700 soldiers wounded or killed, including around 6,600 killed or missing. Despite losing this much, no strategic success was achieved. On the southern front of the Battle of Kursk, the Red Army also suffered 117,000 soldiers wounded or killed. Although the Soviets suffered much larger losses than the Axis, they successfully caused the massive Axis offensive to fail. As a consequence, the Red Army became fully prepared to maintain total military initiative throughout the entire German-Soviet war. Not only due to the fierce resistance of the Red Army on the battlefield, but also because of events taking place elsewhere. This was because the Allies had invaded Sicily on July 10th. Therefore, Hitler needed to reinforce the defenses of mainland Italy to resist this anticipated invasion and had to urgently withdraw the panzer divisions from the Kursk battlefield. Throughout July and August, the Soviets launched their multi-front counter-offensives at full speed. Operation Kutuzov in the north and Operation Rumyantsev in the south. Soviet commanders had deliberately placed weaker troops in the frontline trenches around the Kursk salient. Because of this, only after the enemy's strength was exhausted in the Battle of Kursk did the best trained infantry and fully fresh reserve armies launch a powerful counter-offensive against the severely weakened German enemy. Across all fronts, including the north and south of the Kursk salient, Soviet artillery units fiercely bombarded and destroyed Axis defenses. The German troops on the Eastern Front had never before encountered firepower this intense and concentrated. As a result, the Red Army's armored units and infantry, accompanied by full air support, advanced and relentlessly attacked the Axis enemy, who were fighting a tactical retreat. By the end of July, although the retreating Axis fronts began to stabilize, the attempt to hold firm at Orel completely failed. On July 31st, General Model began withdrawing from the city of Orel, with the Red Army pursuing and attacking closely behind. However, by August 18th, the Soviets had overextended past their supply lines, bringing Operation Kutuzov to an end. At the same time, due to the massive offensive in the south, the strategically important city of Kharkiv was also successfully recaptured. Since the Red Army secured victories in the battles of Orel and Kharkiv, respectively in July and August, Soviet historians frequently group these two battles together with the greater Battle of Kursk. The ultimate result of these intense summer battles was that Hitler had launched his final major offensive on the Eastern Front and suffered a catastrophic defeat. The Axis forces completely lacked both the manpower and ammunition to face a Red Army enemy whose strength and confidence were continuously growing. Throughout 1944, the Axis invaders were gradually crushed and driven out of Soviet territory. Finally, in April 1945, the capital city of Berlin was captured. Hitler committed suicide, and Germany was forced to surrender completely.